box to raise any questions, and we'll more than likely answer the questions at the end in the panel Q&A section rather than going through. But if you've got something that's really, really pressing, Louise in the background is keeping an eye on the chat and on the screen. So if you had burning desire to speak up sooner than then let us know. Take a break when you need it, and I hope you enjoy the session. If you have any issues getting connected, there's an Agile Education Officer Gmail there, and don't hesitate to get in touch, and we'll see what we can do. So just brief summary of the agenda. We're here till 9 this evening, and we've got a series of keynotes from Dr. Tom Madden-Wilkinson, Dr. Chris Hurst, and Dr. Lorna Cornfield, taking us through a journey from, measuring resistance and 1 rep max in the community, to how we prescribe resistant exercise for sarcopenia and frailty, through to sharing with you the findings from wave 1 of the benchmarking exercise program for older people, or BEPOP, which I'll refer to from now on. I wanted to just leave the kind of focus on the resistance exercise for sarcopenia and frailty, just to highlight that one of the reasons for tonight's event was to kind of use the methodology of networks and the power of communities of practice to bring ourselves together to understand how forums like this might support continued improvement and also sustainability of the improvements that have already been realised, particularly by the wave 1 participants from participating in BEPOP. And that's not just to continue to improve the quality of exercise prescription that we offer for the older people that we work with, but it's also to understand, as we evolve BEPOP into its future states, what you feel that needs to look like, and what additional support and tools and techniques might we be able to bring you to help you with that continuous improvement and ongoing learning and development, so that we can deliver the best consensus exercise prescription for older people with sarcopenia and frailty. And I hope that everybody gets as much out of this evening as we hope to. Why did BEPOP kick off? Just as a reminder, we did a study care of our lovely Dr. Witham Miles, who's with us this evening, as the lead author in our paper back in 2020, where we looked at the context of exercise programs targeting older people with sarcopenia and frailty, and explored that with physiotherapy services across the UK. And the feedback that we got, that whilst physiotherapy services were offering exercise interventions, the content of the interventions varied significantly. Most, as you would potentially guess, had a focus on falls prevention and balance training, and less so on the resistance component, which you absolutely need for the treatment of sarcopenia and frailty. And where there was a focus on these conditions, resistance training was only offered in about 2/3. And outcome measures, which you need in order to know what you're doing is actually having an impact and making a difference and improving strength and power in older people, often focus more on the falls and balance elements of the exercise intervention and not on muscle strength. We know that resistance exercise is an effective intervention for frailty, and that is exactly why BEPOP was set up, and how we can use benchmarking methodology to continuously improve how we're doing that in practice and support the clinicians closest to the older people that need those interventions to do that better. That's all from me. Any sign of Tom? Suzanne, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, no, I don't think Tom's got in yet.
Okay,
no.
So I'll just hand over to Chris. I'll stop sharing because Chris is sharing his own slides because he's got some embedded video links. So just let me stop sharing and hand over to Chris, please.
Oh, no, I tell a lie. Tom is here.
Oh,
somewhere.
That's all right. Chris, you go first, and I'll follow you.
I've stopped sharing.
Hi, Tom.
Now. Hi, Tom. Nice to see you.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Have I got some slides? Can everybody see slides, and can everybody hear me, first of all? Suzanne, you're nodding, so that is a reasonably good sign, I think. I'll just try and see if I can actually see the slides. Thanks, Tom, as well. That's fine. I don't mind going. So this is going to be very much a whistle-stop tour on a little bit of theory before the more interesting speakers follow me. So I'm a research associate at Newcastle University, based as accredited sport and exercise scientist. So my background is a little more in performance sport previously. I did a PhD working with older people and looking at some different types of exercise, and then I've kind of followed on from that ever since. So this is a little whistle stop with a bit of theory, prescribe and resistance exercise for sarcopenia. There's some resources in my contact details are there. So if you want any of the resources I refer to, please don't hesitate to get in touch and I can forward those on. And I can't move any slides, which is an excellent start. There we go. Hopefully Harry Potter is now on the screen and the slides are working. He is fantastic. So this essentially is the premise of my talk for the next 10 minutes or so, that exercise is not some magical thing that lives in the ether and we send somebody away to do this exercise and they suddenly receive wondrous benefits and their life is transformed, kind of thing. So we're talking about physiology, we're talking about biomechanics. This is science. It's not exercise and some magic is going to happen. Okay, so that fundamentally that's what I want to talk about, really. So let's start right at the very beginning. When it comes to improving muscle strength and physical function, not all exercise is equally effective. And I know Professor Dawn Skelton is on the call, I saw her before, and this is something essentially that I've just pinched off her, that we have to do the correct type of exercise at the correct dose to be able to maximize the potential effectiveness of exercise. So we wrote a paper, me and one of my colleagues, Professor Avon Sayre, last year, just to try and illustrate some of these ideas specific to sarcopenia and frailty. So essentially, as Sarah's already alluded to, we need to be doing resistance exercise with these patients, with these older adults, to get the benefits on improving their muscle strength and their physical function. But more than that, we need to do the right type of resistance exercise and get them to do enough. And why is this appropriate dose important? Why do we even need to think about an appropriate dose? So if the dose isn't appropriate or effective and our exercise prescription is suboptimal, we're not going to see any beneficial effects. People aren't going to get stronger. They're not going to improve their physical function. This is therefore not going to have any positive impact on their quality of life. And for this individual, it might decrease their motivation. They're less likely to continue to engage with the exercise if they don't see or feel any potential benefits. But also it has wider implications. What are our colleagues and other clinicians or other members of staff going to say if they're referring people for exercise programs and they're not getting any better? Are they going to continue to refer? And then what are there even broader implications for that, for potential funding from commissioners or for financial support or anything like that? So not only if our dose is ineffective are we going to potentially affect and impact the patient, there are much wider implications for this. So hopefully this kind of really clearly illustrates that we need to get the dose right for lots of reasons. So very quickly, some fundamental exercise prescription 101. Exercise training is repeated and systematic performance of individual exercise sessions over a period of time with a specific goal in mind. And this kind of diagrammatically is a little bit what it looks like. So we give somebody a dose of exercise, which is influenced by how often, how hard they work, the exercises they do, which I'll talk about in a minute. That provides them with a training stimulus. So that's what the physiology is. That's a physiological stimulus on the body that causes some remodeling and gets somebody stronger, that can produce more force or whatever it might be. We have an acute training response as a result of that physiological stimulus. And then over time, as we do repeated exercise sessions, we get stronger. Our physical function improves, whatever it might be. And as I've already said, if we don't dose, all these other steps fall down and we don't get the outcome that we want. The prescription of our exercise obviously has to be safe. So we're certainly not going to be getting people to do things that aren't safe for them. It has to be individualized to them and it has to be an effective dose. It has to do what we want. And that's influenced by these three factors, these principles of training, really. So specificity is number one. That the responses to exercise are specific to what we get them to do, to the exercise task. So if we want to get somebody stronger, probably getting them to run around the track isn't going to be the best way to go about that. We have to overload the body and get it to work harder than it does already, provide a greater level of stress so that the body has to work hard and adapt. And over time, we have to progress this. So we can't be doing the same things 6 weeks that we were doing in week 1. The body will get used to that. We're not going to see any adaptation. Things are going to plateau and there's going to be no benefits. So in order to get this desired adaptive response that we want, this physiological response to the exercise dose, we can manipulate these programming variables. So compared to some other modes of exercise, we can just get somebody to cycle on a bike for 10 minutes. Prescribing resistance exercise has a few more considerations. Okay, so we've got fundamental things like this. How often are these people going to exercise? How many sessions a week? Which exercises are we going to ask them to do? How hard are we going to get them to work? What's the intensity going to be? The volume, so how many of each exercise are they going to do? And importantly, really importantly, in fact, how much rest are they going to have in between exercises, but also how much rest are they going to have from one session to the next during the week or during the fortnight? So in the interest of time, I'm only very, very quickly going to touch on intensity and volume because they're the ones that I think are most interesting and probably the most important out of the 5. So let's start with exercise intensity. If we want to get older people stronger, it's a fairly complex picture. Lots of different intensities can get people stronger. They don't always have to be lifting big heavy weights or using big kettlebells or things like that. It's not as complex as that. But higher intensity work is undoubtedly more effective, particularly over a longer duration. So if we've got 12 weeks with somebody, if we've got even longer or whatever it needs to be, at some point, we're going to have to make them work a little bit harder. So this is just some data from a meta-analysis that essentially you can see in the figure that the diamond sort of leans towards the favoring high intensity exercise. So the most important thing that we can take, and that from a practical recommendation, is the most important thing is relative intensity has to be high. So the individual has to work fairly hard and get tired. They should feel hot. The muscles should be feeling shaky. They need to feel like they're doing something, a high degree of effort, or they've performed until fatigue. That's probably going to be good enough. If they've done what you've prescribed and they could still do another 10 repetitions of an exercise, they may well not have worked hard enough, and we might need to think about that. So lots of different intensities can be good. If we have a lower intensity, obviously we have to do more reps, but we probably at some point need to be pushing people to work fairly hard relative to their individual capacity. And fundamentally, what I believe is that intensity is king. So go back to the previous slide where we had the 5 different programming variables of volume and the rest periods and so on and so forth. Intensity is king as far as I'm concerned. That's the most important. But what about exercise volume? So this fundamentally is how much we do. So largely determined by load lifted. So obviously, if we're using things that are heavier or harder to move, we do less of them. And actually what the data maybe suggests is that the number of sets that we do of an exercise doesn't seem to be the primary variable that's responsible for increases in muscle strength. So 1 to 3 sets tends to be similar results. However, longer term, we might need to do more sets, so we might have to progress and do a little bit more. Increasing the volume of the exercise is an effective method to make sure we're progressively overloading people throughout the duration of the program. And a very crude recommendation, 1 to 3 sets of 6 to 12 repetitions might be appropriate for a proportion of people. But really, this is probably the key thing that I want to say, and I'm not particularly sure I like how I've worded it, but most importantly than anything, patients are going to have to work hard. It might not look like this because it's going to be hard for their own individual capacity, but what is hard for them is where we need to try and get to it. It might not be in the very early stages of a program because we need to make sure they're technically good enough to do whatever we're asking them to. They need to familiarize themselves with the activity, but at some point they need to work hard relative to their own capacity. So this is just an RPE scale on the right-hand side you may well be familiar with. Over time, what is hard is going to change, and hopefully they're going to move the scale, and then we're going to have to overload them and make them work harder and get them to do more repetitions or lift more weight as time goes on. So therefore, I hope I'm all right for time. I haven't got to watch, sorry, nearly done. So how do we think about progression? What kind of modes or methods can we use to progress the resistance exercise stimulus over the duration or the course of a program? So we can manipulate the exercise volume that we've just talked about. So get people to do more exercises, fundamentally, is the first one. We might only start with 1, 2, very few exercises within a session. At the beginning of a program, we can get people to do more exercises, increasingly complex exercises as the program goes on. Obviously, we can do more sets and we can do more repetitions. Intensity is fairly straightforward. We can give them a different resistance band. If we're using dumbbells or kettlebells, they can have a heavier one. If we're lucky enough that we've got some machines, then obviously we can crank the weight up over time. These are obviously going to be fairly incremental changes in terms of progression, though. We're not going to be jumping up too quickly and too substantially. We can do other things as well. Just in passing mention, we might have the potential to increase how often these people train from once a week to twice a week. Probably not too much more benefit over the 2 sessions a week, 2 good quality sessions. We can give them less rest. We can ask them to move a little bit quicker when we're confident they can do that safely. And we can look at different types of muscle contraction further down the line if we want to do. But going back to our principle of specificity, higher load exercise, higher intensity, greater improvement in maximal strength over time. But really importantly, let's not forget that we can regress as well as progress our stimulus as well. It might be that we go too fast, too quickly, and it's too much, and we have to take a step back to be able to move forward. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with that. And the bullet point at the bottom is absolutely crucial as far as I'm concerned. It's always not what I've wrote there. Yes, it is what I wrote there. Sorry, I had a mind blank there. It's got to be quality over quantity. Sorry, it's been a long day. I can't even read. Quality over quantity. So fewer exercises done very well is obviously much better than more exercises not done as well. And just to finish off really in terms of monitoring, so we need to be able to progress people as they train and go through our programs. But we're going to struggle to do that if we don't assess how hard or monitor what they're doing in our sessions. So I've just briefly mentioned RPE here because I'm a big fan of RPE. Some of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with it and have used it many times before. A few different scales that you can use for RPE. So you've got on the left-hand side, Borg's traditional 6 to 20 scale, a CR10 RPE scale in the middle, and then a CR100 scale on the right-hand side. So there's a reference I'll put on in a second, which is there. Feel free to get in touch. So these are really good and really simple. It takes sometimes a little bit of time for people to get used to these. These are a good way to monitor how hard we're asking people to work in our sessions. We can ask them about specific muscles, specific parts of the body. We can ask them to provide us with an overall rating of how hard the exercise session was. And if it wasn't very hard, that might mean that we want to manipulate what we do the next time we see them. Or alternatively, if it was too hard, we might want to manipulate it in a different way. So I'll put this in. I'm not really going to talk about it. This is in the paper that I'll reference on my final slide. So this was just our kind of standard starter for 101, a prescription of resistance exercise for sarcopenia in an ideal world. 2 sessions a week, lower body and upper body exercises, getting people to work hard, sets and repetitions, and then plenty of rest in between to make sure we have good quality movement. So to finish off, exercise is a really powerful tool for counteracting sarcopenia. I haven't talked about frailty, but it's good for frailty too, to cut a long story short. But we've got to do the right type of exercise. It's got to be the correct dose. We've got to make sure it's tailored to the individual. We've got to fundamentally make sure we have these 3 principles embedded throughout. It's got to be specific. We've got to overload people, and we must progress them over time. And actually, this map, I suppose, illustrates the fact that there are many roads to Rome. There's lots of different ways you can get to your end goal with your patients or what the patient wants to achieve. Many different ways to get there with the way we prescribe resistance exercise, but we've got to embed those principles throughout. We've got to progress. We've got to overload them. It's got to be specific. And just to leave you with the final thought, really, is that this is, I'm sure, a phrase that many of you will have heard before. So I'm thinking very much here in terms of structured exercise rather than physical activity or anything different. Anything is better than nothing. Surely we can do better than that, and we must do better than anything is better than nothing. In terms of structured exercise, we should be doing as good as we can and offering our patients evidence-based programs that they can adhere to and gives them benefit. Just to acknowledge the rest of my colleagues, the Age Research Group, Newcastle University. My contact details are there. Feel free to follow me on Twitter because I'm vain and the more followers, the better. A couple of papers there, QR codes to scan. Please get in touch if you want any of the resources. I will stop talking because undoubtedly I'm well over time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. Pleasure to listen to you as always. I'll just let you stop sharing. I think I can do it for you, so don't worry, I've done it. And I'll just move into Tom's slides. Tom, if you want to get yourself ready to go. Suzanne, you let me know when I'm on the right screen, please.
Will do, Sarah. Keep going.
It's not coming. Trying. Got me now?
There we go. Yeah.
Lovely. Over to you, Tom, if you're ready, please.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and apologies for my technical issues. So, I'm Tom. And I'm just going to talk a little bit more detail around kind of what Chris has spoke about, introducing some examples from our Strength for Life program that we run at Sheffield Hallam University. Next slide, please, Sarah. So our Strength for Life approach is really about bringing the different disciplines and different professions that across the continuum together, and acknowledging where we have real expertise across those different professions, different knowledge bases, and how they complement each other, but also sometimes how they conflict each other as well. So everything that we try and do is pigeonholed within these 4 categories. Myself, I'm an exercise scientist. Chris and Kazeen, that we work closely with the program. Kaz, an occupational therapist, and Chris, a physiotherapist. And then we take a lot of our inspiration from strength conditioning and the work that we've done in elite athletes, and be able to kind of translate that over to our kind of older populations. Next slide, please, Sarah. Sorry, just keep running through it.
Sorry, didn't know there were animations, Tom, so just...
No, it's all right. So really, by the kind of end of this talk, I want us to kind of bear in mind what kind of Chris has just said, really about this kind of idea of working our patients and our older people that we're working with hard, getting necessarily out the idea that that all strength-based sessions for older people should be chair-based, and kind of moving more towards promoting what older people can do rather than what they can't do. So I think we've all seen this slide before. Really, we need to take this age, this kind of whole life course approach to our strength and balance, and really making sure that in our working age and our midlife, we're trying to maximize our strength and balance throughout that, and keep doing this as long as possible. And we often refer to this in when talking to patients and clients we're working with as our muscle strength bank account. So very similar to how we all put away money in our pensions to save up for our retirement and hopefully have a really nice sunny retirement. What we want to do with our strength levels is try and bank them up as much as we can in our early life, and try and maintain these for as long as possible to help us be as independent as possible as we get older. So Chris touched really nicely on this kind of idea of sarcopenia, and really just a reminder from a kind of exercise scientist perspective that it's really the loss of muscle strength and the much greater loss of muscle power that really is underpinning the loss of our functional capacities as we get older. And whilst the kind of original research literature was very much focused on the loss of muscle mass, this emerging prevalence of loss of strength and power much more important. And that's great for us because it's much easier for us to measure within a clinical or gym session rather than sending people off for a DEXA or an MRI to measure their muscle mass.
Got a blank slide here. Is that intentional, Tom?
Oh, no, there's some animation. Yeah.
Just keep going.
Yeah, keep going. So really, if we're looking at the kind of pathophysiology behind that, there's distinct mechanisms which contribute to our loss of muscle mass, typically as losing 1 to 2% of our muscle mass from our midlife, in our kind of mid-30s. But as I said, there's really distinct pathophysiological features of us losing much more strength and power typically 3 to 4% from that age of 35. With distinct different mechanisms, you can see a lot more focus on the neural drive to our muscle, as well as that loss of muscle mass. And this is really important when we're thinking about our strength and conditioning, to focus on the strength and components of that, and the adaptations, especially in the neural drive and strength for the muscle that we're targeting. Other things that we want to consider is where we're losing muscle mass, either in acute settings during maybe inpatient stays, or over a kind of longer period during normal aging. And there's vastly more muscle mass lost in our lower body, as you can see from the imaging. And really, therefore, when we're focusing on building back our functional performance, these should be the muscles that we should maintain our focus on if we're wanting to get the biggest bang for our buck. Oh, next slide, please. And as Chris highlighted, strength training is different for everybody, whether you're the kind of world's strongest man trying to improve your maximal strength, in this case, Eddie Hall trying to lift over 1/2 a ton, or whether it's some of those other images that we're seeing to the right-hand side of that. Embedding strength training, as long as we are individualizing that approach and making it relative to that person in front of us, is going to be beneficial. I always like to term, especially translating what we do from elite athletes into our older populations, is it's the same muscle groups that Usain Bolt's there using to run as fast as he can down the 100-meter track, or our great British cyclists going as fast as they can around the velodrome. It's the same muscles and principles that underpin our physiotherapy and our treatment of older people to help them walk upstairs or overcome the functional limitation that they have. Next slide, please, Sarah. And then just as a reminder of what Chris spoke about, those 3 key principles that we need to bear in mind of specificity, overload, and progression. Next slide, please, Sarah. So why is it important that we concentrate on intensities? And really this is underpinned by neuromuscular physiology. And this is kind of some groundbreaking work done in the early 50s, which showed us how we recruit our various motor units. And really, we need to be producing a lot of force to be recruiting all of our motor units, specifically those ones that we tend to lose with aging, those faster motor units that provide the most force. From a strength and conditioning point of view, if we're trying to produce more and more force, then we're going to recruit more and more motor units. But interestingly, if we are concentrating on producing that force as quickly as possible, trying to preserve our muscle power, then we can actually recruit those muscle fibers, those faster muscle fibers, at much lower force levels. Next slide, please, Sarah. The physiology, as a kind of physiologist, I would always be the advocate, but more and more I'm starting to see that physiology is almost the least important kind of aspect within the treatment of older people. And it's really about providing this holistic model. And as Chris kind of touched on, getting people to do anything is a really good start, but really helping to buy into individuals' motivation for why they want to do strength training really is a helpful way to engage them within that. I'm hoping that video should just run there, Sarah. So this is one of the members of our class. He came to us really struggling with lifting his toddler grandson and really not feeling very confident in being able to do that. So we progressively overloaded Bob in this case. So the bag is about 5 kilos heavier than what his grandson weighed at the time, and manipulated different ways of moving with that bag to enable him to feel more confident and build up his strength well above what he's needing for that everyday activity with his grandkids. Next slide, please, Sarah. So if we look at the strength conditioning based literature, we're really changing the program of what we're wanting depending on what adaptation we're after. And you'll often see if you read kind of men's health or women's health, these different rep ranges for the adaptations that we want. And this allows us to measure or kind of quantify those changes in intensity. So typically, if we're focusing on more maximal strength activities, we tend to see that characteristically as lower amount of repetitions and a higher number of sets. Where if we're wanting to work more towards a hypertrophy range, tends to start to be towards higher reps, or somewhere in that kind of Goldilocks zone, as Chris spoke about, that 6 to 12 repetitions, where we're starting to get adaptations across the board. Next slide, please, Sarah. And as Chris touched on, there's a whole host of different things that we can start to change to alter that intensity, and not just looking at load, how quickly we're moving the load, the types of contraction that we're using, the equipment that we have, and also the environment. So just to illustrate that in slightly more detail and just show that translation between more athlete work and into clinical populations. So you can see the two programs on the right-hand side. So the top one is from a sprinter program. You can see really high percentage 1 repetition maximums, a relatively low number of reps and a high number of sets. And you can see how that might translate into an older adult cohort. There are the specific adaptations, especially when we're training for maximum strength, that we start to elicit. There's a real concentration on adaptations around our nervous system, so increasing neural drive, increasing the number of motor unit action potentials, known as rate coding, and then better synchronization within our motor units. If we're training in this manner, we don't tend to see much hypertrophy, especially with the lower number of reps. Next slide, please, Sarah. Now that changes when we're looking at training for muscle power. Typically lower loads, and looking at the research literature, there's a whole range between 0 and 80% of 1 repetition maximum. But really, if we have a focus on producing a lot of force as quickly as possible with that maximum intent, that's going to generate as much of the adaptations as we want. When we're focusing more around power training, we need to ensure that there is a good strength base to start with, and really emphasizing that intent to move quickly. The ideal thing with power training is because we don't necessarily have a really long time under tension, relatively low fatigue compared to more traditional types of training. Next slide, please, Sarah.
Just a couple of minutes, Tom.
Yeah, okay. And then we might want to just look at training for hypertrophy. But as I said, really the focus is on strength and power. Next slide, please. We can skip this one. So really, as Chris said, we really need to make sure that people are working hard enough. And there's a couple of ways that we can go around that to make sure that we are challenging our system and working above those activity of daily life thresholds. So the most common way, we've all seen percentages of 1 repetition maximum. So we can go through the process of slowly increasing the load and dropping the number of repetitions that someone might do. And traditionally, from an athlete setting, we would keep increasing the weight until you reach the limit once you've had a kind of rest in between. Now, there are a number of different ways of converting this. So, for instance, if we look at someone's 6 repetition maximum, so the amount of weights they can lift for 6 reps and no more, that roughly equates to about 85% of their maximum. And if we wanted to work out what their 1 repetition maximum is, there's calculations for us to be able to do so. Next slide, please. There's, of course, the rating of perceived exertion that Chris spoke about. And when we're talking about the difference is in ranges, if you just press the animation, Sarah. If we're wanting to convert to 1 repetition maximum, 40 to 60% of 1 RM, typically between 3 and 5 out of 10 on the CR10 scale, and 70 to 85% of 1 RM between 6 and 8 on that scale. And then next slide, please. Alternative ways would be to look at or ask people how many repetitions they have before they could fail. And this approach has started to get more and more resemblance in the literature. And certainly for improvements in strength and muscle size, we're looking to only have 1 or 2 repetitions remaining at the end of the set. As you can see, there's different thresholds for muscle adaptation, whether we're using a lower weight or a higher weight. Next slide, please. So there's different ways that we can make that more challenging, and I'm just going to show you very briefly some different ways to scale that. So differences in sit to stands. So we've got Betty on the left-hand side there using assisted sit to stands with Chris and Kaz. We have Jerry in the middle doing his thruster movements, which is slowly going to be moving the weight through. And then Eric on the last video doing more kettlebell type work, but a real emphasis on the muscle power. I think you should just be able to click those. So yeah. So you can see some very different. So working on the same muscles, just different progressions for each of them. Next slide, please, Sarah. So there's other examples, so different ways that we could scale perhaps a deadlift. And if you have a look on YouTube through our Twitter feed, you'll be able to see a whole host of those exercises and how to scale them if you are interested in doing so. So we want to really have that emphasis on working hard during our exercise and physical activity sessions, working above those activities of daily living, ensuring we have that consistency, providing some education and making it enjoyable, that focus particularly on the lower limb, to make it as efficient as possible, try and use as many multi-joint movements and really go towards that high effort, minimal dose response. We can get away with benefits just with 1 session per week if that's what we can get people to buy into. Next session. And there's just some contact details for me if you want to get in touch. And then lastly, just my collaborators and research funders. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. I'm not going to stop sharing to look at you, but I appreciate you tolerating me sharing your slides for you. We've got the animations there in the end. We're having questions at the panel and Q&A session, Tom, if that's okay with you, just so that we move straight on to Lorna's presentation, if that's all right. Let me welcome Dr. Lorna Caulfield, everyone, and let Lorna introduce herself, and she's going to talk to us about the findings from wave 1 of the BEPOP project. Hi, Lorna.
Hello all. I think my video and everything should be sharing now. Oh gosh, you can't see me because I've got a halo behind me. Lovely. Well, anyway, good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be back on the results from wave 1 of the 2 weeks. I'll be all right. So, am I able to? I guess I am able to move this. So, I won't linger too long on background because we've talked about this a lot, but it's safe to say that we've established in the last hour that sarcopenia and frailty, those very common conditions affecting older people, sarcopenia estimated at about 5 to 10% of older adults living in the community, but the likelihood is that that number is higher just because of it's most likely being underdiagnosed. that these two conditions are associated with significant adverse outcomes for patients. We see decreased independence, increased institutionalization, longer, more complicated hospital stays as well. And as we have talked about, resistance training is the evidence-based effective intervention for both of these conditions, with international guidelines advocating for their use. But questions remained prior to starting the BEPOP project about how best and how optimally we deliver these exercise programs to all the people in the community, so the optimal frequency, duration. And this is following on, as Sarah alluded to at the beginning, work that was undertaken by the British Geriatric Society, Sarcopenia and Frailty Research, SIG, into current practice in exercise interventions in sarcopenia and frailty. Which found that of those that responded, they were 94% were delivering exercise interventions to people with sarcopenia and frailty, but the resistance training was only making up 65% of the exercises that were being prescribed. And outcome measures of muscle strength, so grip strength and sit to stand tests, were being used in fewer than half of respondents. So really, the question with BEPOP is how best do we support the implementation of this best evidence-based practice in the real world across a variety of services with a very broad demographic of patients that I'll come on to, and figuring out what the barriers are to achieving this. So we can move on to the next slide, please. That's great. So there's a lot of potential ways we can do in addressing this kind of knowledge practice gap there. Large scales RCTs could help establish a program of training, but that would be quite costly, quite time consuming, and ultimately it's going to take quite a long time to trickle down to patients and give them the benefit. So the BEPOP project adopts a benchmarking and feedback model similar to SNAP audits that you may be aware of, or national hip fracture audits. And what it does is it is able to harness the variability that we see in current practice by inviting sites to feedback and benchmark their current practice. We can then evaluate that against an evidence base and develop feedback and specific recommendations. And as we continue through these cycles, we can see a cycle of continuous change there. So it's really a model more so than your large scale that really has its feet in the real world and is able to adapt and look at what the real world barriers are to delivering exercise training to older people. So if we just move on to the next slide. Thank you very much. So this is wave one. We had 10 sites from across the UK participating, and we had requested that they were able to feedback data on 20 patients consecutively referred to their service for exercise interventions in sarcopenia and frailty. So we were focusing on community-based services at that point, so not so much inpatient services. And we were focusing on trying to move the focus away from those very specific services. So for example, stroke rehabilitation, post-operative rehabilitation, or cardiac rehabilitation. And our participants were able to input this data via an online data collection tool, so much like a questionnaire essentially, and they fed back details on who their patients were demographic-wise, how they were assessed, how interventions were planned, how they were reviewed and reassessed, and what the outcomes were for patients at the end there as well. And we'll just move on to show a little bit about what our patients look like. So overall, we got data on 188 patients from across the UK, aged approximately about 80 years old there. And as you can see from some of the graphs on the right there as well, just under half of the referrals into services were coming from general practice. But as is also evident there, you can see that referrals are coming from a huge range of services, inpatient, outpatient, and from a wide variety of people. And as we can show there, we found that 83% of our cohort had a clinical frailty score of 4 or greater, but only 35.6% of people were referred specifically for interventions in sarcopenia and frailty, which reflects that data that actually exercise interventions are one of the less frequently offered aspects of that comprehensive geriatric assessment. And we can just look a little bit at the reasons for referral here. So a lot of people had more than one stated reason for referral. Falls is clearly still the main reason, and just in over 3/4 of people, but also improvement in physical performance. So whether this is mobility, balance, confidence, exercise tolerance, seen there in 76. And both of these, so falls, improved physical performance, should trigger a consideration of could sarcopenia, could frailty be contributing here? And given that sarcopenia is a significant risk factor in all of these presentations, consideration given to is resistance exercise as part of our prescription there as well. And these figures, I think, demonstrate a bit of the scale of the challenge, of the complexity of working with older people. I think sometimes when we work with older people, it becomes such commonplace, but I think sort of stepping back and acknowledging that we have an older population who live with varying degrees of frailty, which brings with it significant challenges with social issues and cognition issues, and that higher risk of decompensation from perceived minor illnesses, presenting from a multitude of services for a broad variety of reasons in a number of different pathways. I think just acknowledging that, we can start to see that actually is quite complicated and can be quite complex in effectively addressing the health needs of this population. So then if we just move on, I'll quickly go over the results of the first wave. So we looked firstly at how patients were assessed when they were first referred to services. And actually, as I've sort of alluded to, sarcopenia isn't being routinely diagnosed, but patients are presenting with, phenotypically with factors that could result from sarcopenia, like falls. So that referral, that assessment period, becomes a really key time and a real key opportunity to maybe formally identify and name sarcopenia there. So many individuals were assessed using more than one method, many using non-strength-based assessments, so your Tonetti scores and your Berg balance scores, and that reflects that many people are being referred for falls prevention. And there were other subjective measures of strength, such as the Oxford scale, being employed. But overall, about 61% of patients were receiving at least one strength-based assessment, such as grip strength, timed up and go, your gait speed assessment, 1 rep max, and the sit to stand, chair stand tests there. And then just on there. I'm skipping ahead slightly, but I think assessment and reassessment go hand in hand. So we've talked about assessment at the beginning of an intervention, but as we've talked about progression and effective exercise prescription, reassessing patients and seeing how they are progressing and seeing how strength is progressing is so important. So this graph shows the blue bars are those methods of assessment that we used at the beginning, and the red bars are those that we used at the end. And I suppose what we can see here is that rates of assessment drop off after an intervention. And as we can see right on the right there, 30% of people had no reassessment at the end of their intervention at all. We found that for paired outcome assessment, so getting the same assessment at the beginning of your intervention as you do at the end, largely we're seeing this was not consistent. So for those using 30-second sit to stand, 100%, well done. But we see that for others there as well, chair stand assessments only being repeated in just over 50%, grip strength in about just under 80% there as well. So really getting that effective picture of how well the training has worked for patients, and that also will inevitably have an impact on how we're progressing exercises. And then I think my next slide is just a bit of a summary of those findings there for those who want it. So that's 61%, so nearly 40% not being assessed using an objective strength-based assessment. And those methods of reassessment following an exercise program dropped off, with nearly a third of patients not having any reassessment at that point. And then moving on to actually look at the exercises that were being prescribed there. So nearly all exercise prescriptions that we looked at included some element of resistance training. But the most common element that was prescribed was body weight training. And actually, in 45% of people who were prescribed exercise interventions in the first wave, this was the only element of resistance training that was prescribed. So 52% had an additional element, most commonly resistance bands or ankle or wrist weights. We found that free weights were very infrequently used in machines, not at all. And I suppose that's interesting to note, given that free weights can be quite useful in addressing multiple muscle groups and functional exercises, as we've just seen in Tom's excellent presentation there as well. So then my next slide just kind of, again, just summarises that there, that although resistance exercise is being prescribed, bodyweight exercises remain the mainstay, and that use of I suppose, as you want, or additional elements of resistance exercise are happening sort of in the minority there as well. And then moving on to next, we talk about progression, that vital thing to make sure that the resistance exercise that is being prescribed is effective, as Chris touched upon there as well. And we found that for most individuals in this first wave, resistance exercise was progressed primarily through an increase in volume. So just on the left-hand side here, you can see those bars representing increased repetitions, sets and durations. And then looking there further along to those smaller bars of increased band resistance, increased weight, and increased 1 rep maximum there as well. So 86% had increased number of repetitions, whereas only 26% were progressed by an increase in intensity. And I think that can be reflective of the finding that in nearly half of the patients undertaking these exercises, that bodyweight exercises were the sorry, I've got extra windows popping for some reason. Can you still hear me?
Yep, you've got
Lovely,
yours.
thank you. It's just my computer doing something. Okay, it's wonderful. So yes, it may be reflective of the fact that the primary mode of resistance exercise was bodyweight exercises, which can limit the methods of progression available. And I think what really strikes me is this fits in nicely with what Chris was saying about that idea that when we're prescribing resistance exercise for older people, managing expectations, explaining what resistance exercise might feel like, that, you know, if in order to be effective, you know, I mean, muscles would need to be hot, need to work hard, as it were. And I think managing that expectations will be key in encouraging people to continue with exercise and get the most out of it there as well. I suppose just moving on to the next slide there as well. We did look at as well at signposting and referral onwards. So encouraging people to continue with exercise after that completion of that formal intervention. And we found that only 41% were signposted or referred onwards. Now, naturally, individual circumstances and local services availability is going to play a huge role in this, particularly following the reset and rebuild post-COVID, which has cast a long shadow and may unfortunately do so in the future there as well. So just coming on to sort of our key messages here as well. So sarcopenia, as we've alluded to all the way through, is not being routinely diagnosed. And I think there is going to take a bit of time for the message to sort of trickle down. The thing I always think about is with frailty, as we think back maybe even 5 or even 10 years ago, talking about frailty formally, using things like the Rockwood Clinical Frailty Score was very much the domain of, you know, older person specialists and academics, really. And now we're seeing that this is very commonplace. And I'm hoping that the similar thing will be happening with sarcopenia, and it will take time, but the message will come through. And I suppose the key thing here as well is that point of referral, that point of assessment in exercise services is really key at being able to formally identify this. We're finding that those opportunities to identify probable sarcopenia and inform exercise prescription are perhaps not being picked up on as much as they could be there, as I've just alluded to. And that often we found that resistance exercise was not always being monitored or progressed optimally, and that evaluation was not always done, and often a wide range of tools were used. So following on from that first wave, we came up with these recommendations from wave 1 there as well. So the depth recommendations, I suppose, if you wish, looking at that assessment, so that all patients should be assessed using an objective strength-based measurement prior to starting any exercise program, recognizing that probable sarcopenia can be diagnosed using those assessments, and that can be documented and shared with other healthcare providers to support that individualized care. That progressive resistance exercise training needs to be included for anyone with probable or confirmed sarcopenia or frailty. And that progression and reassessment is vital. So progressing by increased intensity as well as increased volume, and then reassessing at the end of an assessment using that same assessment we used at the beginning. And where possible, taking things forward as best possible. So often signposting and referral to ongoing exercise services. Just moving on there. This is just to point out that first wave of BEPOP was named wave 1 because we intend to have many more waves and many more cycles of benchmarking and feedback. This provides a really excellent opportunity to create, as Sarah was talking about at the beginning, that community of learning, this real world learning, where we can, you know, support all our participants in taking part in evidence-based service development and giving them the evidence and the tools they need to help develop their services optimally. And so then just my acknowledgements, as it were, thank you to everyone on the BEPOP team. And most importantly, I suppose, thank you to everyone who took part, many of whom are here today. Really, it definitely couldn't have happened without you. And my thanks to the British Geriatric Society as well, who supported this project financially.
Thank you very much, Lorna. It was lovely to listen to you. I like your style, I like your presentation style. It's very nice. And I just don't know if you realised inside our recommendations, we've actually got an acronym in there that we probably haven't picked up on yet. Have we? Look, ADEPT could have been the title for your submission, Suzanne, that we've missed.
Maybe next one.
The next one, yeah, indeed. I'm going to hand over to Suzanne now, who's going to acknowledge in a different way, just like Lorna's just done, those who contributed to Wave 1 as participants, so we can hear from them firsthand what the experience felt like for them and how that has informed their practice, if at all, of course. And I'll let Suzanne share this part of the session, but I'll change the slides, so bear with me, please.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, as Sarah's just said, we reached out to all the participants from Wave 1 of BEPOP to ask them to come along tonight and share some of their experiences. Thankfully, and we're very grateful that a few of them are able to join us tonight, and they're going to talk through their experiences. And then I'm going to cover a couple of people who weren't able to make it but sent some slides along. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Janet first, if that's all right, Janet, to take us through your experiences of participating in BEPOP.
Yeah, no, thank you very much indeed. And I suppose just a point on my first slide, that the previous slide said that we were in Edinburgh, and we're not, we're in Fife. So I'm definitely flying the Scottish flag, but north of Edinburgh, rather than actually in Edinburgh at all. So if you could move on to the first slide, Sarah. So I've got 4 slides, and I'm covering the 4 questions that Suzanne asked me to cover. So firstly, it's the motivations for becoming involved. And I think they've already been covered, really. And we wanted to benchmark our practice to put best practice for other people's practice. We wanted to know whether what we were doing was equivalent to other similar settings, and whether we were doing the right thing. We wanted to increase our knowledge, and one of the big things I think for always contributing to something like that is contributing to the development of evidence-based practice. If nobody took part in BEPOP, then we wouldn't be sitting here reporting back on it. So it's just important for me to contribute. So thanks, Sarah. The experiences, the RedCap online data capture system was easy to use. So that was important for us. And it did ask broadly for information that we already collected. But actually, I would have wanted to add in more detailed information. It was a fairly broad brush approach, and I did at times think, gosh, I could have put in more. We weren't asked questions specifically, I suppose, about how long people attended, and the frequency, I suppose. So we could put that somebody had attended, I don't know, 6 times, but they didn't know whether that was 3 times in 1 week and then once every 2 months after that. So it was the sort of like the regularity of their attendance. And we would have been quite happy to have put in more detailed information about the interventions that we were offering as well. Whether others would be, I don't know, but that was our experience. And on to the next slide. So all our patients had validated strength assessments carried out, so we were quite pleased about that. Obviously, as some of the frailty and sarcopenia documents have come out, we have changed or had already changed our practice. So when the consensus for sarcopenia came out, we added in a 5-time sit to stand as our routine. We already did grip strength, gait speed, and timed up and go. So we felt we were doing quite well with that. And they were all a prescribed appropriate resistance exercise. The things that we didn't do as well on, or as well as we thought we might have done, was the resistance exercises increased by intensity. They were all increased by volume and number of repetitions, but not by intensity. And that was a learning point for us, because often the ongoing exercises are progressed by our support workers, and perhaps they're being a little bit more timid, I suppose, than we would want them to be. And the referral onto ongoing exercise interventions. Now, most of our patients are asked if they would like to go on to an ongoing exercise intervention, but the vast majority, as you can see, declined that. Because it's a fairly standard thing for us to do, to refer people on to an ongoing exercise intervention. And out of the cohort that took part in BEPOP that we reported on, the number that agreed to do that was quite low. So on to the final slide now. and it's going forward. So I would really like to link with the other participating services. So we could form a group to talk about what we do and how to improve. I'd like to know a little bit more detail about our outcomes and specifically what works. So we heard from Tom and Chris about the research about what works, but actually translating that into practice and having a little bit more detail, for example, about the types of exercises we were actually prescribing, and knowing the outcomes from that. And I think the really important thing for me is supporting our exercise referral schemes to deliver interventions for sarcopenia. Like I say, we refer on to them a lot, but at the last had with our exercise referral scheme lead, they did admit that perhaps there was a little bit too much of the social than the exercise. And we've had 2 or 3 patients come back from the exercise referral schemes, and the comment they've all made is that we worked them harder within the assessment and rehab centre than they were worked when they went out to the exercise referral scheme setting, which is a little bit of a disappointment, because obviously that's the ongoing, continued exercise that we want them to do, rather than the short intervention we can offer them in the NHS. So that's just what go forwards. I think that's the end of my slides.
Thanks so much, Janet. That's great. We'll keep questions for the Q&A panel just after everyone's given their feedback, if that's okay. But thank you so much for taking part and for presenting for us tonight. Next up is, excuse me, Daddy Longlegs flying in front of me there. Next up, Charlotte is going to give feedback on behalf of the Belsay unit up in Newcastle. So Charlotte, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. It was really interesting hearing what Janet said. Very relatable, I would say, actually, from my experience when I worked in the day unit. So I'm here tonight, as Suzanne said, just to share some feedback about the BEPOP project on behalf of Lavinia Cooper and her team lead, Jenny Bailey, from the Belsay Day Unit Physiotherapy in Newcastle. And just to say, so the Belsay Day Unit provides multidisciplinary outpatient service, offering assessment and treatment for older people, and that responds to primary and secondary care referrals, sort of offering interventions, preventing hospital admissions, as well as supporting recovery after illness or hospitalisation. It has a small physio team who provide assessment and advice, as well as one-to-one therapy and group exercise. And typical referrals are for reduced mobility, falls prevention, walking aid assessment, impaired balance, as well as to improve frailty and sarcopenia. So what was their motivation? They told me it was to ensure delivery of best care and supporting patients to reach the best possible outcomes, as well as to inform ongoing service improvement and to promote the day unit physiotherapy contribution. But also participation for them is very much around their personal interest. They felt the project sounded, really interesting, wanted to be part of it, to help them understand sarcopenia and the implications for clinical practice. In terms of their experience, overall, they said it was a positive experience. It helped them consider their practice around sarcopenia and exercise prescription, and to better understand the needs of their patients and improve the therapy offer. Staff reported finding it easy to identify suitable patients for BEPOP. They typically see older adults, often living with frailty, and within their service, it's actually the physiotherapists that grade frailty severity using the Rockwood Clinical Frailty Scale. They commented that it was interesting to see that their service had a higher percentage of patients living with frailty at 75% compared to the overall percentage of 59%. Interestingly, in terms of the BEPOP data entry, they found this to be complicated and time consuming, using the Red Cat system, which was very unfamiliar to them and that they needed support to complete. They felt the feedback was useful to outline good areas of good practice, as well as changes to consider. And for them, in terms of what they did well, most patients received an objective strength-based assessment of physical performance at baseline, usually the 5 times sit to stand. Patients were all all prescribed resistance exercise and offered a greater than average number of supervised sessions than other participants. So it worked out to be about one session per week for about 6 weeks. And in terms of improvement ideas, BEPOP recommended they considered using more equipment for progression of resistance exercise, and should address increasing intensity. They were also encouraged to repeat the same strength-based assessment on completion of the intervention, and refer on to other exercise opportunities. However, they reported that they aim to reassess all patients on discharge, and they felt it would be interesting to explore the reasons why this may not happen. They felt that it may have been related to higher levels of frailty, people less willing to attend, possibly due to cost or potential concern around infection risk of being in a clinical area. They thought that would be interesting. And also, just to pick up about the onward referral, it really is about availability of services, and they very much felt a lot of their patients required hospital transport to attend their clinic, and that there simply isn't anything in the community that is accessible for those patients. Obviously, if some progress adequately to access other things in the community that they can get themselves, then that's great, but that they didn't feel that was the case, so that might be worth collecting in future waves. And then regarding practice changes, they said this experience prompted really great sort of reflective practice conversation, helpful discussion about areas for service improvement. They felt they had better confidence using sarcopenia terminology with colleagues, particularly around CGA clinics. They were better at sharing probable sarcopenia diagnosis in their records and in discharge letters. They feel they've got better at screening, and that now sits within routine physiotherapy assessment. In terms of exercise, they felt they were better at introducing resistance bands and progressing band strength. They're now trying to repeat sort of 5 times sit to stand at every review appointment to inform progression, but also if they don't come back at the end, you've got a more up-to-date measure, but also recognise how that can really contribute to patient engagement and patient motivation to carry on. And they are also exploring local onward referral options and making contact with social prescribers, seeing what's available now locally, as well as sort of voluntary sector organisations like AGK. And then going forward in terms of support, they felt that it might be useful to have a sort of teaching resource available for therapy staff. There's always quite a high staff turnover, so that would be useful also for students. That could support some consistent messaging and a consistent approach about sort of best practice in terms of screening and exercise prescription documentation, those sort of things. They felt it might be useful to have a patient resource to explain diagnosis and the value of exercise. And the BELSO team advised that they are really keen to contribute to future waves and to evaluate, that ongoing service improvement, but they may need a bit of help and support for data entry. Okay, that's everything I've got from the BELSO unit.
Thanks so much, Charlotte. Yeah, that's good to hear. We appreciate the feedback. So that's all good. Thank you so much. So pass our thanks on to the team, won't you? So
I will.
Okay, next up we've got Sally from the Sherwood Rehab team at Mansfield Community Hospital. Sally, over to you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
So I can definitely relate to everything that that the previous speakers have said, that Janet and Charlotte have just been feeding back. So I think this might be a really quick whiz through the slides that we've got. We're a really small team. I think we contributed literally just 20 patients to the study. So we felt quite, do you want to move on to the next slide? I think we felt quite disappointed really in how we compared to to other services. Again, one of the main motivations for taking part was to compare ourselves and to, you know, how we can, how our service compared to other community teams and other outpatient teams. We have done previous training on Chief Medical Officer's sort of strength training recommendations, but that was a while ago, and we felt whether it would be good to see how we were doing with that. And again, like the previous speaker said, we felt that maybe our patients were really quite frail and elderly, and I think that there was a reluctance amongst our team to do the intensity that is being recommended. So yeah, we were very motivated to take part initially, but I think that motivation waned as we got into the actual data inputting, if I'm honest. So yeah, there's only 2 physio staff, not even 2 whole-time equivalents participated in the study, and I think we find it difficult to commit the time. Also, some of the questions, I think Janet had mentioned, some of the questions about frequency didn't quite fit in. We don't very often get an opportunity to see people on a weekly basis. So we were kind of guesstimating frequency of intervention. So that might have influenced our results or skewed our results maybe a little bit. And again, I, as a sort of lead physio and team lead, I was quite disappointed that we weren't able to contribute more to the study. And again, that was probably timing and maybe getting buy-in from the other members of the team to commit the time to input the data. So yeah, again, we recognise that we didn't feel that our service compared favourably. It made us kind of really reflect that we should be doing more strength and resistance training. We probably should be doing more baseline and follow-up assessments. But it did, as Charlotte said, it did really make us sort of reflect on that, and it sort of reinvigorated a commitment really to make changes for our frail elderly patients. And I've written down lots of times intensity after tonight's session. So this is something that we'd be able to feed back. And like I said, regardless of the results, I think just going through the process of doing this benchmarking exercise has really made us reflect on our practice.
That's great, Sally. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's just one more about support moving forward. So again, what people have already said, it was about the sort of definition and diagnosis of frailty and sarcopenia doesn't very often come through from our referrers. So a bit more confidence in ourselves in saying, you know, probable sarcopenia, and, you know, there's a lot of deconditioning out there, particularly post-pandemic, again, reflecting what people have already said. So some clear guidance and, you know, what the benchmark should be would be really useful moving forwards.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And yeah, we hope that you're using that reflection positively and don't feel too bad about how you compare to others. It's about being a positive thing. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. Okay, next up we have Gemma.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, no problem, Gemma. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we how do I go through the slides?
Sorry, Sarah will do that for you. Sarah will move them on for you.
So we can go on to the first slide, thank you. Yeah, so I just wanted to give a bit of background about what our team does. So we're intermediate care. So we do 6 weeks of intervention maximum, facilitating discharge and preventing admission and hopefully reducing readmission. So we see primarily older adults, so fallers, post-surgery, post-infection and admission to hospital, exacerbation of chronic condition. So they will get referred to us to promote independence in the community. We noticed approximately half of our patients are moderately or severely frail, with some above and not that many below. So our patients, I think, were actually quite a bit more frail than the average. So our average were more frail than the whole group's average. And the way we work is that we do goal-based functional rehabilitation at home. So we're not specifically treating sarcopenia, but we are aware of frailty, but we're kind of treating it in the way that we use the functional goals. So can I have the next slide? So the motivations to participate, so it got circulated around everyone at work, all of the physios, and I'd recently done a module in frailty, so I was personally quite interested. I thought our team would be perfect because we have many frail elderly people that pass through our team. I thought it'd be great for us to participate and contribute to research. And yeah, I think it was fantastic experience, and having the all this information given by the experts is just so wonderful and very inspiring. So thank you. We also wanted to find out what other services do, and of course, improve our own service for the elderly frail people passing through our team. Can I have the next slide? So the experiences that we had. So personally, I've increased my own knowledge about sarcopenia and have passed that on to the team. Like many other teams, we have rotational staff and a high turnover of staff. So in terms of the core people who were working on it, we've probably had about 5 rounds of rotation since then. So it's kind of hard to keep everyone on board with it. It's given me a really good insight into collecting data for study purposes. I found the REDCap data entry fine, actually, and that was very interesting to do. I found the individual report on how our team was doing really, really interesting. And similarly to the last presenter, it was with a little bit of sadness that we hadn't done better, really, but it's great to have the feedback as to what we can specifically do to improve. So basically what you've said was to use more resistance, more intensity. And I think, yeah, the way it's been presented is very inspiring. So I feel like I can go back to the team and really promote that. So I've got a good chance to implement these recommendations to the team. Challenges for me, so I was the main person doing it. I did have another person, but there was kind of some limited buy-in from other individuals. So at the time, maybe it was one of the most important things for me to be doing, but it was really not the most important things for other people to be doing. So I was hassling and hassling and hassling, which I'm sure other researchers are very used to, this kind of attitude from others, which was frustrating, but well, we managed it, we completed. So it was quite difficult to dedicate time to data collection when we were busy, and we did go through spurts of just being incredibly busy, and then BEPOP popping into my head, like, oh no, we've not done it for ages. And then, yeah, so getting a little bit stressful about that. Also, challenge with our population is our patients are really, really frail, sometimes so frail, like the goals are to go from being bedbound to not being bedbound, and often they're kind of at that interface of functional capability where that's not going to change. And I actually think as a team, we're getting better at identifying who we can help and who we can't help. But I think definitely during the period of time that we were doing it, we were probably seeing people quite far down the frailty pathway, and it was at times quite difficult to help them. And a lot of people got readmitted, so we couldn't really complete the data on that because, yeah, the intervention just ended. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, so we kind of had it was an incidental finding in our team, and I think the criteria was to be a particular level of frailty rather than having sarcopenia identified. So we never see people coming with a diagnosis of sarcopenia ever, even if they come from the elderly care ward. It's just not something we see. So our treatment is sometimes not focused on impairments, but instead the goals were the function. And obviously, if we can treat the sarcopenia, the function will improve. But sometimes with the patient that we've got in front of us, we can't really be impairment based because people can't participate for, I don't know, cognition, or they're just too fatigued. So that was a bit of a challenge in treating the sarcopenia. And yeah, seeing the elderly people with the weights and doing the bench presses, that's fantastic. But unfortunately, we don't really have the patient population most of the time to even consider doing those kinds of things. But I do think we do often treat the strength, but we could just add more resistance, more reassessment, intensity, and take the advice that you've given us. So the plans for changes. So as I said, many staff have rotated. So I need to re-present the findings to the physio team and get people on board with actually doing some good stuff about this and getting the feedback that was tailored to our team. So talk about progressing resistance. We've got TheraBands of all colour now, which is great. We had a shortage. Consider educating patients about sarcopenia. I don't know if perhaps it would just be one other thing for them to worry about, but that we could consider doing that so they know why they're being worked so hard. carry out more sarcopenia related outcome measures so we can make more of an informed diagnosis about who's got sarcopenia, so we can put that in our discharge summaries back to the GP, and consider ongoing referrals, because we're just a 6-week service, so we need to refer people ongoing to make further gains. And that's it, I think.
Thanks so much, Gemma. That's great. Thank you for your input. We really appreciate it, and yeah, all the challenges that you've overcome. So we'll see if there's any questions in a few minutes. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Deborah. Over to you, Deborah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me? You hear me speaking? Yep. Thank you. So I'm Deborah. I work in a community physio team. Well, I'm the only physio. It's an MDD team in Northern Ireland, in Ballymoney. It's quite a rural community that we work in, and we would travel quite a lot of distances, and a lot of it is one-to-one. We did have a falls group before the pandemic, but then that was ceased and never restarted, unfortunately. So if we had have had that, I think we would have had different results from now, but these were all from one-to-one patients. Another incidental finding was that 90% of my population that was used for this was a CFS of higher than 5. So we would have quite a high level of frailty in our population. So the next slide was my motivations. So I'm quite inquisitive. That's why I wanted to do it. I wanted to have another little dip into research. I haven't done an awful lot since uni. I wanted to see if we could improve our service. I was nosy to see what everybody else was doing in the rest of the UK. And I would be interested, obviously, in frailty because of my patient group. A lot of our referrals are for falls. Sarcopenia is never mentioned, but I had heard of it, obviously, and I wanted to see if there was anything that we could do to help. And I wanted to see if we were meeting any guidelines, because more often than not, we just focus on, as the other people say, on functional goals, trying to get them better at walking, reducing falls. That was more of what they wanted to do. They are not our client group aren't interested in sarcopenia or frailty. They don't really have a clue. So I quite enjoyed it. It was interesting, but yes, as the others said, it was time consuming. As I say, I'm the only one in the team. I've only got 30 hours per week, so it was kind of taking quite a chunk of my time. I did end up doing it in the evenings, but I wanted to finish it. It was a stark reminder of the need for valid and measurable outcome measures. We, as already said, a lot of times it's not strength-based that we're using. We're using like the Berg balance. We're focused on falls prevention, and those were things that we did probably as a habit more so as than what we should be doing. During the pandemic, there was an awful lot of phone call and reviews done over the phone or not at all because of various reasons. So a lot of times our practice had changed. So we didn't always get to remeasure our outcome measures at discharge, and that was part of our problem. And now we're trying to rechange that to what it was like before the pandemic. But it has also increased my interest in sarcopenia, and we've done some journal club on the subject and trying to share that with others in my wider team. So the next slide is the changes. So we have purchased a hand grip dynamometer and have put it into use actually this week. It took us a long time to get it because of various reasons, but we've finally got it and using it with scary results. So many of them are terribly weak, getting like 12 kilograms today and very scared, but you know, that's what they've got. That's how frail they are. We have had an increased adherence to using these, the better outcome measures, most definitely. We're carrying out more face-to-face follow-up visits. It was just like a little nudge in the right direction. Please, will you carry out these follow-up visits in person? And it has also, obviously, as I said already, increased in sarcopenia. So my peer group, we're trying to get even our assessment sheet changed so that it will prompt each of us to use these outcome measures more frequently rather than just every now and again. And I have increased my referrals to the Otago group, which is available in our area. Some people can't get to that, though. We'll say that in the next slide. So the support we would need, we need to have more CPD from your good selves. It's been very useful tonight, so please give us more. We need more availability of relevant face-to-face courses in Northern Ireland. Please come to Northern Ireland. We did have Dawn, we did have later life training, and it was wonderful, but I don't know that it's been here in a long time. We would like our managers to promote follow-up face-to-face visits, because of that habit of doing like a new to review ratio of 1-to-1 in the community. There's not an awful lot of time for follow-up or progression of exercise, sadly, because of our referral rate and our very low amount of staff. That's what's been happening. The barriers to service, as I've already said, large geographical area, review phone calls, and very few staff. So many clients also refuse face-to-face follow-up because of lack of interest, comorbidities, very frail, poor mental health, poor memory, lack of family support, rural clients that won't attend the follow-up visits or won't actually go to the STEPS programs afterwards as well. So that's one thing that I don't know what we do to help that. All right, so I think that's all I've got to say. Next slide.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Thanks very much. Okay. I'm going to just feedback from the final two sites that we got information from. So this is from the team in Torbay in South Devon. Andy, the manager, sent me these slides. Thanks, Sarah. So their motivations for taking part in BEPOP, and they give a bit of background about their team. So they provide a 12-week rolling program of strength and balance classes and have done since 2005. So they within that's 11 classes of 75 minutes per week that are led by a later life PSI instructor, and obviously participants are expected to carry on at home, and they are signposted onto other parts of the rehab pathway if they're more appropriate, so they're assessed for that treatment plan. So during the time period April to March, as you see there, they carried out 470 initial assessments, and their reason therefore to take part was to benchmark their service against all the other services that are going on across the UK, so similar to what other people have said. Okay, next slide. Thanks, Sarah. So their experience was that REDCap system was user-friendly and they got the support that they needed, but data collection did take time because they felt they were kind of double reporting, because they were already collecting some of the data that we were asking for. So they're obviously collecting it on their own system and then having to put it into REDCap as well. We carried out some interviews with the participants. So I did some interviews and they thought that was a positive experience. So I'm grateful for that. So data collection focused on, like has been mentioned, on lots of things that perhaps didn't capture the functional benefits that the patients actually were telling them about, and that might be more relevant to the patient experience, and so might be something that we need to capture moving forwards. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so their results and reflections moving forward. So from their findings, 100% of their patients completed the timed up and go as a strength-based assessment, but sarcopenia was not being diagnosed, similar to what's been said before. 100% of patients did have resistance training that used body weight and resistant bands, and intensity and volume was increased in all cases, so that's great. And 90% were referred on to further interventions. So some reflections is that the responsibility for diagnosing sarcopenia lies kind of across the board. They felt the timed up and go was a good fit, and they were also using the Berg as manageable objective assessments. Their recommendations were kind of in line with the guidelines, and they felt that the 10% who weren't referred on to ongoing services were probably because they were due to ill health or people that didn't actually complete the programs. So they found it interesting and useful to take part in the study, but they felt that time implications meant going forward they might not be able to do the next wave, and they'd be grateful though for improved guidance on exercise prescription for treating sarcopenia. Thanks, Sarah. And then the final feedback that we got was from Carol and Pauline, who are based in the Isle of Man. Thanks, Sarah. So yeah, their motivation to take part again was because they want to try and keep up to date with evidence-based practice, wanted to see if what they were doing was effective and in line with the guidelines. And yeah, they feel a bit isolated on the Isle of Man and wish to have, they want to have their own services that compare to some of those in the UK. And they're the lead physios for their community service team. So again, trying to lead by example and encourage the rest of the team to engage in service development. At first, they found it time consuming once they got used to the REDCap database system, but once they've got familiar with it, they felt that it got easier and quicker. And again, as has been said before, it was data that they were kind of already collecting anyway. So since they've had their feedback, so one of the recommendations was to increase intensity, as we've heard a lot about tonight, not just duration and frequency. So they've been able to purchase additional weights to allow them to do that, and they're using those now. And they've obviously fed all of this back to the staff involved in the team and to make them aware of what changes need to be made, and are also being more aware of the need for diagnosis of sarcopenia and sharing that with other colleagues. And their support that they needed was ongoing support from managers and colleagues within the team. And I think that was it from Carol and Pauline. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to stop sharing now so we can open up into discussion. And give us a break from looking at the screen. Have I stopped sharing, Suzanne?
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. So, Louise, would you like to bring up the questions that have come up through the chat, or shall we start off with opening the questions to the room now? What would you have a preference, Louise? Are there many questions that have come through?
Yeah, there's a few. Shall I go through them, and then if there's anything that hasn't been answered, people can shout up?
Yeah, it might warm people up to speaking up as well.
Yeah.
If that's all right.
So there's one for Chris. Chris spoke about the number of different exercises that we might prescribe for a patient. Is there any more guidance on this, please?
Chris, still with us?
Yeah, sorry, I dropped my mouse on the floor and I couldn't get off mute. Sorry, I've picked it up now. What was the question? Exercises. So the short answer is, I probably can't recommend anything specific, but if anything, there's probably too much. If you just go on to, even if you went onto YouTube and spent 5 or 10 minutes trawling through YouTube, you'll be able to find a whole host of exercises. And there are, I'm sure there's another good resource that I've seen that I've got. And actually, I think what I would say about exercises is that it's quite easy to get wedded to your favorite exercises, and I've been guilty of it in the past. But without doubt, the most important thing is which exercises the patients like and don't like. There's millions of different exercises that are out there. Some are going to be more appropriate than others for your particular individual patient. Some that they're going to like and some that are not going to like. And often it's going to be a bit of trial and error, I think. That's a vague, probably unhelpful answer, but there you go.
Thanks,
Thank you, Chris.
Next one, is there any standardization for sit to stand, i.e. are patients allowed to use hands or no hands to help?
Who's going to take that one? Sorry,
I'm not sure if I could just jump in quickly. So what we do is we would standardize 5. We use 5 repetition sit to stand. There's a paper that we've wrote that's got some step-by-step guidance. I'll put it in the chat after I've answered this question. And generally speaking, our standard would be that no hands across the chest so that they can't be used. And if a participant needs to use their hands, we typically would view that as that they can't complete the test in the way that's designed, so that they would get no score. Miles, I think you might be able to provide a better answer than me potentially.
Yeah, so I think probably what's important to remember here is that you might want to use it slightly differently for diagnosis and for progression monitoring. So if you're wanting to make a diagnosis of sarcopenia, then you really need to be asking the person to do a 5 times sit to stand without using their hands. And if they can do it within 15 seconds without using hands, they haven't got sarcopenia. If they're having to use hands to do it, that's enough actually to make a diagnosis of sarcopenia. If you're going to use it to think about progression, though, you might have somebody who's got sarcopenia, they're having to use their hands, but clearly if you're able to evidence that they use their hands and their time's gone down from 25 seconds to 20 seconds, that's some evidence that you've actually made progress. Now, you can argue about how much of that progress is from upper limb strength and how much is from lower limb strength. But in terms of function and in daily life, I think it still has value. I think what's important with it, though, is that you've got to document it. So you can't compare, no hands versus using hands. And I think you need to start off by trying to get them to do it with no hands. But yeah, the documentation is the key thing here.
And just to add to that, I think, Miles, it's also the important nature of having the opportunity to give the individual who you're prescribing and the exercises to and working with some motivation and some feedback themselves about what they're achieving and how they are improving throughout the course of the intervention. And small changes are sometimes all it needs to take someone to retain motivation in their exercise program, and not to discount the benefits of measuring it and documenting what they can do, how they progress for it, and sharing that back with them too. Any more there, Louise?
Yeah. It sounds as if some of these BEPOP projects are almost seeing patients too late when frailty is very severe. Should we be trying to get to our patients sooner in their journey?
Absolutely.
And then there was sort of a follow-up question within a bit of a discussion after that one, asking, is there any evidence to suggest what CFS score resistance exercise has the biggest impact on for reducing deconditioning?
Oh, you mean, is there like a sweet spot in the frailty spectrum?
I think that's what it means, yeah.
Shall I answer that?
Yeah, if you can.
No, it's all gone horribly quiet. So I think it's an interesting question. I think one thing to say is it is never too late. You can take people who have got really severe frailty and you can still improve their function. And of course, at that end of the spectrum, small gains actually can translate to a great deal of difference for people. So I don't think we should be sort of avoiding doing this in people with sort of CFS 7 and above. It may well be that you have to put a little bit more preparatory work in, and it may be that you have to take into account that these people are very weak and very fatigable. But I don't think that we should write people off at that end of the spectrum. And in a way, it's almost sad that we're even having to have this conversation, isn't it? Because it does presuppose that we've only got limited resources, and where are we going to put our time and energy to do the most good? In an ideal world, I think we should be offering this across the spectrum, and of course, we should be offering this earlier. So I was at a meeting a few days ago where Ashley Gluchowski, who some of you may know down in Salford, was talking about the work she was doing with middle-aged and young older adults who are actually fit and well, and promoting resistance exercise training there to have a positive impact on the life course progression of strength. And I think that there are opportunities to intervene with resistance training all the way from middle age onwards. So whilst Chris and Tom were talking, I was in my upstairs room doing my deadlifts, doing my resistance training, because I figured when I hit 50 that it was probably time to start this. So I was setting up good habits for as I aged. So thank you for giving me the motivation to get on with that, Chris and Tom. So yeah, I don't think that there is a threshold with beyond which exercise training is a futile thing to do. But obviously, you do need to modify the approach to some extent.
Absolutely. A couple of hands up there, Louise, in response to that. Charlotte, your hand is up. Is it you the first?
Yeah, all I was going to say is that really when I teach lots of physio teams about frailty, even if they have a lower CFS score, I would still encourage them to do usual care and look and address any issues such as sarcopenia, so it still would have value there. So it isn't necessarily just because they have frailty, but I would actually get them to explore that to potentially interrupt that trajectory to really slow down or prevent further deterioration. That's all I was going to say. But obviously you've got the issue around resource, haven't you?
Thank you. Louise, I thought someone else had their hand up. Is that the hand gone down?
No, I think it was Janet.
Yep.
Hi, Janet.
It's a pale hand rather than a yellow hand. I too have been to the gym on my way home. I am preventing sarcopenia. And what's more, I go to the university gym, so the students I've just taught go, oh, Janet, you are doing what you're supposed to be doing. Yes, I am. No, it's just to say that we are a service that probably sees people a little bit earlier on in their journey. Our average frailty score is probably more of a 4 than a 5, 6 or 7. But the issue we probably have is getting our referrers to refer even earlier if necessary. So it's a bit of education of the GPs who are our main referrers. But again, it's the patients who we see probably only go to the GP when they've started having problems. So it's really only when they're really struggling with their mobility or they've had a fall that they actually go to see the GP, who then thinks about referring them on to our service. So it's a population health issue, really, isn't it? I think that's the message across.
I wonder whether we need to get grip strength into the National Health Check suite of assessments. A good starting place for us, mightn't it? Start earlier upstream.
Yeah, I mean, we grip strength everybody that crosses our door, and by that I mean even the 2 students I had start with us on Monday. I was doing grip strength as a patient, so I said, right, you test yourself. And it's amazing how variable young, fit physiotherapy students' grip strength is, and it gives them quite a shock sometimes.
Do you have a sense, Janet, of why you feel that you compared to others, that you're getting the referrals a little bit earlier on, albeit not as early as you want? Is that what you think around the education and engagement with the primary care colleagues?
No, I just think it's a representation of where we sit in the spectrum compared to the other BEPOP participants, really, because we are a buildings-based service. So we have a community service who sees people who are frailer because they're housebound. Whereas our patients, we don't even have transport anymore, so our patients have to come in to see us under their own steam or relatives or lifeboats or whatever they come in. So they are just generally that little bit fitter.
Thank you. Any more questions, Louise?
Yeah, there was a bit of a discussion around lack of access to equipment after Lorna had done her talk, and there was the high percentage of people only using body weight. A few different reasons for that, and I sort of wanted to ask Lorna whether there was any sort of reasons given for the lack of equipment, just to see if it mirrors what's been said in the chat, really.
There was no specific reasons given. We didn't ask people for sort of to kind of provide reasons or what was available to them as well, but it's certainly an area that would be interesting to look at in the future as to what's available. And I suppose one of the key objectives with BEPOP is about providing services the information and that kind of data to take it back to them, to managers, to advocate for their own services and to advocate for service development there as well. I can see there's been lots of talk in the chat there about how we rationalize services and actually like starting to prioritize and advocate for own services and, you know, exercise equipment, space within rehab. I thought it was an excellent point was made in the chat as well about advocating for finances for transport, getting people to these gyms as well. So no particular reasons, but a lot's been brought up in the chat. They all seem very relevant.
Brilliant, thank you.
Can I just add to that, Louise, just
yeah.
to say that, you know, lots of thought went into the questions that were asked in the BEPOP benchmarking survey itself, and trying to get that balance between too many and too little. And we've had feedback that it was time consuming, but I think there are definitely tonight themes around, you know, if it was only body weight, why weren't other equipment items available? Because that probably could have been the reason, and we didn't explore that. But also why were individuals not reassessed? We've had some narrative about that tonight too, and we'll take that back and give some thought to the next iterations of BEPOP, so we can think about how we don't lengthen the survey any further, but start to get some more of that understanding so that we can make that information available, because they're the conversations that you need to have with managers. You know, we couldn't do X because we didn't have Y. And hopefully the feedback we've received tonight will very much improve next iteration. So thank you all for your contribution. Over to you again, Louise.
Someone's asked, do service KPIs reflect the need to do post-intervention assessments?
I have a response that I'll offer, even though it's not necessarily, it might be my personal one, but I as a physio and how I'm trying to understand that what I'm doing is actually making a difference. It's my motivation as a physio to do the right for the people that I'm working with, to assess and reassess. And I don't need a KPI to spur me on to do that. And I know that's very easy to say, sitting here and not being on a ward when you're being asked to do 101 other things at the same time, or, you know, running a busy schedule in the community service. But I think we have to understand and take on board what our own personal responsibility is. You know, I don't think we're going to see it come through in things like the community services data set, are we? You know, we know that you know, there's flaws even with the hip fracture database around capturing mobility post-discharge rather than just place of residence. That, you know, we've been working with the CSP and the hip fracture order to try and influence that community data set, and we're still got a long way to go. So my response to that would be, you know, assessment and reassessment is paramount to what we do as physiotherapists, and it's, you know, it's necessary not just to progress but to actually evaluate your service so that you can do that continuous improvement.
Great, thank you. Is 5 times sit to stand better to use than a 30-second or 60-second sit to stand test for diagnosing sarcopenia?
Miles, do you want to come into that one?
Yeah, so we had an interesting debate about this, and Dawn may wish to put her tuppence worth in here as well. I think they both have the strengths and weaknesses, and one of the concerns about the 5 times sit to stand is whether you have sort of ceiling effects of people who are quite high performing. The challenge is that at the moment the European sarcopenia guidelines focus on the 5 times sit to stand as the preferred measure for making the diagnosis of sarcopenia. So I think using either is better than using none of the above. But it's easier to align the diagnosis if you use a 5 times sit to stand. But again, you know, if somebody's already made the diagnosis and you're looking at a tool to allow you to monitor progression within your therapy sessions, or to evaluate the outcomes of your service, I think either are fine, and the 30-second sit to stand is a perfectly good alternative. Dawn, are you still online? You are still online. Do you want to chip in here at all?
Yeah, I was just typing in. I agree, for diagnosis, it's got to be the 5 times sit to stand, because that's the consensus from the European Working Group. But not only does 5 times sit to stand potentially have a ceiling effect, it potentially has a floor effect as well, if you've got someone that can't do one stand without using their arms. So I think for diagnosis, it's fabulous, but I think for outcome measure to show change, we'd be better off using a 30-second.
Thank you.
Thank
Louise?
you. I think that we've got all of the questions now, but the comments have been coming in thick and fast, so I'm sorry if I've lost track a little bit.
No, we can download the chat, and if there are any that we haven't addressed, we can do that outside of the event before sharing it back with the attendees. And I know there's just one there from Katrine. Hi, Katrine, I hope you're well. That Suzanne can wrap up with now, I think, in the closing section. So unless there's any other last fire questions from people in the room, I'll bring my slides up whilst you have a look for that, because I've forgotten how to do screen share just because of...
Speak of it, Sarah.
You got presenter view.
Yeah, that's it. That's great. Yeah, so a few people have talked about when is the next wave of BEPOP data collection and what's kind of happening next. As Lorna mentioned, there are going to be future waves, and Miles, is it fair to say we want to start that as soon as is humanly possible? So basically we need you, we need the services and you yourselves who are out there delivering these services to get in touch. And I've just put my address as Agile Chair at the bottom of that slide there, to get in touch and let us know that you are interested in taking part in the next wave of BEPOP data collection. To those services who've already taken part in wave 1, you're welcome to take part in waves 2 and 3. So they are, it's coming. We haven't got an exact date of when it's going to start, but we'd really like as many expressions of interest as possible. So please do get in touch. Put it in the chat there now if you're interested, and leave an email address, and we will make a note of all of that and get back to you as soon as possible with what the next steps are for that. A few of you may have heard people congratulating me on submitting a grant application. So there is also, and I'm glad to say that people have asked for teaching resources to support best practice in exercise prescription for sarcopenia. So what we have done is apply to the CSP for their charitable trust funding, where they will give us some money to do some research, and that is going to be what we've now called How to BEPOP. So how to provide better exercise prescription for older people. And what that's going to be is a project where we first of all get together with yourselves to find out what services you are providing, and then we want to co-design a training package with those who are interested in taking part, to put together the resources that we need to then share with the wider community about exercise prescription for sarcopenia. And then we're going to roll that out as a program to evaluate it, to see whether it actually makes a difference back in the real world, and what you think of the training program. So we're really going to evaluate that training in this project. So we're looking for volunteers for that as well. You can volunteer for both. You can be part of BEPOP and part of How to BEPOP. We haven't obviously got the money for How to BEPOP yet. That is, like I say, I submitted the application yesterday, so we're not going to know until December, but that's something that's in the pipeline. And again, we just want to get everyone's feel for if they're interested in taking part. We will get all those details together and get back to you as soon as possible about those two projects. So I don't know, Miles, do you want to say anything else?
No, I think that sort of covers it. I mean, we're unlikely to start the second wave before the beginning of 2024. But the more of you express an interest, then the easier it is for us to start doing the preparatory work. I think it's been very helpful listening to the conversation, because I think that will help shape the kind of questions that we will ask and the type of data that we'll seek to collect. And there are obviously sort of issues that we've touched on tonight that the first wave has thrown up and that we might want to take a deeper dive into to collect some different data. But obviously we also want to collect similar data around the key things that we measured in the first wave, so that we can do some comparison. I just wanted to also say thank you very much to all of you who've taken part tonight, and all of you in the audience. I think it's a fantastic turnout, and it really speaks to the enthusiasm about sarcopenia, but also the hunger for knowledge. And I think that's really striking. I also particularly want to thank all of you who have contributed your reflections tonight. The mere fact that you took part in BEPOP makes you a winner. You are ahead of the curve in terms of the quality of your service, because it's a hallmark of a good service, to be able to stand up and reflect on the service you're delivering. So even though some of you have shared some of the disappointments that you had when you saw the results, I think that's a fantastically mature thing to be able to reflect on that, and to think about what you're going to do as a result. And I was really heartened by the determination that you are all showing to say, we're going to make this better, we're going to make changes. You're making concrete steps already, and that to me that really epitomizes what we all hoped BEPOP would help and catalyze. And so I think tonight has been a fantastic demonstration of what this kind of benchmarking project can do, and you are all a real credit to your services in taking part and also driving those changes forward. So thank you for that.
You think I planted Miles as being the person to summarize and wrap up tonight, didn't you? Well, I didn't, so thank you very much for doing that so perfectly well, Miles. I appreciate it. What I'll add is just that we have had a conversation as a BEPOP team around how we can facilitate yourselves continuing to link up and network and share insights and learning together. And one of the suggestions was the NHS Futures platform. So if you leave that with us, we are still exploring what the options might be to try and enable a community of practice to continue that doesn't require us to continuously come back into a webinar or an evening lecture scenario. And we can come back to you on that too. And what I also picked up, which is I was really excited about, was around the recommendation around an information resource for the older person who's living with or at risk of sarcopenia as well, and how we can use that to empower them in the world of personalised care, to understand the reasons why we're asking them to take part in resistance exercise in the first place, and how that will add value for them, and offset the risks of further deterioration or further frailty progression. And I think we need to take that forward as a BEPOP team to think about, or as Agile, we'll take that away and have conversations about that too. And on that note, we are 2 minutes early before 9 o'clock, which is a rarity whenever I'm chairing or facilitating. And I am again echoing Miles, so thank you so much for giving us 2 hours of your time tonight, and for the speakers from the participating sites. It's been really, I think for me, really refreshing to hear your contribution and to see so many of you come. It was the reason that we wanted tonight to happen, and I hope you've enjoyed it too. and we look forward to working with you all again going forward into the future. Have a nice rest of your Tuesday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
What was our total maximum number in the end, Suzanne? Did you clock it?
119. I wrote it
No
down.
way.
Yeah, 119. Thrilled.
Well done.
Hi, Sarah. It's Kat. Just want to say thank you very much for the hi earlier.
Shout out. Yeah, nice to see you. Disappeared so quickly from my world, and I just nice to see your face reappear. So I hope you're keeping well.
Yeah, I'm much better now. Thank you very much. So yeah, I pop in and out.
Yeah, that's fine. That's
Look after yourselves. I'll catch you again.
Bye now. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
I really like Nancy Maisie's name. It's got a really nice ring to it, and it looks really nice written down, doesn't it, as well? I think maybe because Lola watches a show called Nancy Clancy.
Looks like we've got loads of email addresses in the chat.
Yeah, we have.
Oh, I better stop recording, hadn't I?